Welcome to today's edition of Weathering the Storms of Life with the Rainses. Rob Rains, Sally Tippett Rains with you, stlsportspage.com, as well as putting these up again on rainbowsforkids.org, the charity arm of our website here. We start another week of staying at home.
It's been a lot of fun putting together these quizzes, though.
Mm-hmm.
Now, today, I can honestly say I don't know what this one's about because you did it yourself, so this will be
Well, we went through some Hall of
interesting.
Fame players last week. We did, like Bruce Sutter, Whitey Herzog, managers or players. This week I thought we'd do 5 decades. So we've got 5 decades going back 50 years, starting in the 1970s with today, and then we'll move on to the 80s on Tuesday and 90s.
Hope everybody enjoyed those last week. It was good, fun memories for me.
Yeah. So same thing with the 70s. Not the greatest decade in Cardinal history, but a lot of good moments that came up that decade as well. So we'll ask some questions. Hopefully you will.
Well, 2020 is not the greatest year in history, but a lot of great things are going to come out of that as well, too.
Is that your words of wisdom for the day?
Sort of. My words of wisdom are choose happy, find contentment. And I feel so strongly that we need to help ourselves choose happy in the middle of all of this stuff that I started a blog on rainbowsforkids.org, the Choose Happy blog. So if you want to check it out, please do.
It's been very good. You've got a good response
Put a
to
new
that.
one up today. Yeah,
so.
thank you.
Also got a new story up on the website as well today about Stephen Gingery, who's the Cardinals pitching prospect. And waiting out the pandemic is really nothing new for him. He's been waiting to pitch for more than 2 years because of back-to-back Tommy John surgery. So
Yikes.
Got his story up on the website today as well. So on to the questions here for the 1970s. We'll give you 10 questions and go through all the questions and give you the answers. So just play along at home or jot down your answers however you prefer to do it. So we'll go with question 1. The Cardinals had 2 players who won MVP awards in the 1970s. Who were they? Very simple, straightforward question. Who were the 2 MVPs for the National League played for the Cardinals in the 1970s?
Question 2. When Red Shandy retired after the 1976 season, who replaced him as Cardinals manager? Who replaced Red Shandy?
Question 3. The National League Rookie of the Year in 1974 was an outfielder on the Cardinals. Who was it? Who was the National League Rookie of the Year, 1974?
Question 4. The longest game by innings in Cardinal history occurred on September 11th, 1974 against the Mets in New York. How many innings did that game go?
A lot of them. Yes. Question 5. On opening day in both 1973 and 1974, the Cardinals starting lineup featured 4 players who would go on to become elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Can you name all 4? The 4 opening day starters in both 1973 and 1974 who went on to become members of the Baseball Hall of Fame.
Question 6. In the decade of the 1970s, the Cardinals had only 1 player who hit 30 or more home runs in the season. Who was that?
Question 7. Cardinals went into the final day of the 1974 season tied for first place in the National League East, but lost the division by 1 game when they lost that night in Montreal, and the Pirates won. A future Cardinal hit a 2-run homer off Bob Gibson in the 8th inning that gave the Expos the win in that game. Who was it?
Question 8. How old was Garry Templeton when he made his debut for the St. Louis Cardinals on August 9th, 1976?
Game played against the Astros that day. Question 9. Cardinals used their first-round pick in the 1979 draft on a high school outfielder from New York who would go on to become an All-Star and a multiple Gold Glove winner. Who was it?
And question 10. This one sounds fun. From 1972 through 1977, a different player was the opening day shortstop for the Cardinals on each of those 6 seasons. How many can you name?
Okay. So those were our questions from the 70s. Now we'll go back and give you the answers. Hopefully you did well on those questions. Brought back some memories as well.
What do you remember about watching the Cardinals in the 70s? What were you doing in the 70s?
Going to high school and going to college. So neither one in St. Louis. So probably was just watching more as a peripheral fan.
Listening to the radio every night in bed.
Sure, probably not as much as I go older because I had other things. I did that more as a kid growing up. But once I got into, I did a little bit, I guess, in high school. But probably, obviously, the team not playing as well. You kind of, as a normal fan, don't really get as involved with them. But I had high school football, college football, kind of things to worry about at that point.
Well, as a kid growing up in St. Louis, and then in the 70s, we would go down on the Redbird Express to the games, and it was a lot of fun. I'm sure a lot of people out there remember that.
Sure.
They have the Redbird Express now, but it's a little bit different. We picked it up at the Crestwood Plaza. I remember that.
All right, on to the answer. The Cardinals had two players who were the MVPs in the 1970s. One, of course, was Joe Torre in 1971. The other was a co-MVP, Keith Hernandez. He shared that award in 1979 with Willie Stargell of the Pirates.
And the person who replaced Red Shaney's was Vern Rapp.
That didn't go so well.
It didn't go so well.
Vern didn't have a long tenure as the manager. Had
How
some
long
run-ins,
was it?
About a year and a half. Had some run-ins with Al Hrabowski and a few other things. He'd been a long-time guy in the minor league system, but didn't work out, and led the way to Ken Boyer coming in as manager. Kind of a transition period there for the Cardinals. Question 3: the NL Rookie of the Year in '74 was Bake McBride, the Fulton Flash, pride of Fulton, Missouri.
The longest game by innings in Cardinals history was September 11th, 1974 against the Mets in New York. How many innings? 25. I wonder if anybody out there remembers that game or was maybe wouldn't be added since it was in New York. But.
Yeah. The one thing I think was funny was that the story that's told over the years is that Jack Buck did the Star of the Game interview. He had to do it because it was a sponsored event, even though it was 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was. And when somebody effective, here's the Star of the Game, Kenny Reitz. Kenny, congratulations. That was our Star of the Game. So, on opening day in both 1973 and 1974, the Cardinals starting lineup that day featured 4 players who would go on to become elected to baseball's Hall of Fame. They were catcher Ted Simmons, first baseman Joe Torre, left field Woodbrock, and pitching Bob Gibson.
Those were all some good players.
Absolutely.
Question 6. In the decade of the 70s, the Cardinals had one player who hit 30 or more home runs in a season. Who was it? Richie Allen hit 34 in 1970.
Question 7, we talked about the Cardinals not having any pennant-winning teams in the 1970s, but they did come close a couple of times. The closest was in 1974, went into that final game of the season needing a win to have a chance to go on to the playoffs, but lost to the Expos when Mike Jorgensen hit a 2-run homer off Bob Gibson in the 8th inning of that final game.
Question 8. How old was Garry Templeton when he made his debut for the Cardinals on August 9th, 1976 in a game against the Astros? He was 20.
Yeah. Not the youngest player. Ted Simmons was actually younger. He made his Cardinal debut as 19 as a position player, but Garry was one of the youngest Cardinal players when he made his debut. Cardinals used their first-round pick in the 1979 draft on a high school outfielder from New York who would go on to become an All-Star and a multiple Gold Glove winner. It's kind of a trick question because he did both those things after he was traded from the Cardinals to the Pittsburgh Pirates. It was Andy Van Slyke.
And question 10, from 1972 to 77, a different player was the opening day shortstop for the Cardinals in each of those 6 seasons. How many can you name? I couldn't really name any of them except Templeton.
Actually, there's 2 guys on this list that I really was not familiar with. One of them I had no idea. I had to look him up. Dal Maxwell was the first one in 1972. Ray Bussey, who was a backup infielder, very brief career, 1973. 1974, Mike Tyson, who was normally a second baseman, played short. 1975, Ed Brinkman came over for 1 season. 1976, this was a guy I had no idea. Lee Richard was the player. He had been with the White Sox, played with the Cardinals that only season. I think it's like 60 games, so very nondescript player. And then 77, of course, Templeton started his run as the Cardinals shortstop until gave way to Ozzie Smith.
What else do you have planned for us for this week?
We're going to go decade by decade, so on Tuesday we'll head into the 1980s. A much more successful
I will
decade.
remember those.
All right, so that's today's edition of Weathering the Storms of Life with the Ranges. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you Tuesday here on stlsportspage.com, also rainbowsforkids.org.